The colony had been beautiful once. I knew this not from memory, but from the survey photographs filed in the Viridian 7 settlement registry, which I had read on the transit shuttle because reading available documentation before arriving anywhere was not a habit I had chosen, it was simply what I was. The photographs showed white-paneled residential towers catching the amber light of a Class G star, children's communal gardens running along the eastern ridge, market corridors open to the sky. 43,000 people had called this place home. What I walked into now had no towers, no gardens, no corridors open to anything. My name is Marcus Hale. I am 62 years old. I have spent 38 of those years in service to the Earth Diplomatic Corps, which means I have spent 38 years in rooms where the outcome of conversations determined whether people lived or died in large numbers. I have negotiated resource-sharing agreements with the Solari Collective. I have brokered ceasefire terms with the Dravani Frontier Council in a room where the ventilation had failed and both delegations were breathing recycled argument. I have, on 4 separate occasions, talked armed parties down from decisions they could not have recovered from. I tell you this not to establish authority. I tell you this so you understand what it means when I say that walking through Viridian 7 was the first time in 38 years that I did not reach for language. There was nothing here that language was designed to address. The Keth delegation had arrived at Viridian 7 11 days ago under the standard protocols of the Outer Reach Accord, which human diplomats had spent 6 years negotiating with considerable care. The accord guaranteed the safety of civilian installations during active diplomatic engagement. It was, by every measure, a functioning framework. Both sides had signed. Both sides had sent representatives to the ratification ceremony on Helio Station. I had been one of the humans in the room that day. I had shaken the approximation of a hand that the Keth primary delegate extended, which is a gesture they do not naturally perform, but had clearly researched and practiced for the occasion. 6 years of careful architecture, 11 days to use it as cover. The Keth ships had entered Viridian 7 orbit under diplomatic registry flags. The colony's defense grid had remained offline as required by accord terms during active diplomatic presence. The Keth had spent 4 days conducting what they logged as cultural observation. Then, on the 5th day, they had done what they had, apparently come to do from the beginning. 43,000 people. I walked through the eastern residential sector for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I did not run. I did not look away from what I was looking at. I documented what I saw in precise language because precise language is the only tool I have ever trusted, and I was not going to stop trusting it here. When I had completed my walk, I sat down on a section of wall that was still structurally sufficient to support my weight, and I filed my assessment report to Earth Command. The report was 11 pages long. It contained no emotional language. It did not use words like atrocity or horror or tragedy, not because those words were inaccurate, but because they were insufficient. And insufficient language is a form of dishonesty. I will not commit unofficial documentation. The report described what I had observed. It described the pattern of the strikes. It described the targeting methodology, which was not random. It described what the targeting methodology indicated about intent. I filed it at 14:22, station time at 14:31. I received a response from Director Amara Ose, who had been my operational director for 11 years and who I trusted more than I trusted most things. Come home, Marcus. Emergency session. They want you in the room. The Earth Command Chamber on Luna Station was not designed for grief. It was designed for decisions, which is a different thing entirely, and the distinction was visible in every architectural choice. The circular configuration that placed no chair at the head of the table, the lighting calibrated for long sessions, rather than comfort, the absence of windows because windows invited distraction, and this room existed only for clarity. 18 people sat around the table when I entered. I knew most of them by record and several by experience. General Petra Vasiliev, who commanded the 3rd Fleet and whose operational record I had read on the transit because I read available documentation. Ambassador Chen Wei, who had spent 20 years in the Outer Reach before moving into senior coordination. Director Ose, who was looking at me the way she looked at things she had already analyzed and was not surprised by, which I found steadying, and Secretary General Yumi Adaize, who I had met exactly twice before, both times in contexts that were significant enough that I remembered the details of both meetings with specificity. She was looking at the table when I entered. She looked up when I took my seat. Her face was composed in the way that faces become composed when the composure is load-bearing. The session ran for 4 hours and 17 minutes. I will not reconstruct it entirely here because the significant material can be rendered more efficiently. What was decided? Earth would not issue a statement of condemnation. Statements of condemnation had been issued twice before in response to Keth boundary violations. The Keth had filed formal acknowledgments of the condemnations and continued their boundary violations. Earth would not pursue sanctions through the Outer Reach Accord framework. The Keth had just demonstrated with considerable thoroughness what they thought of the Outer Reach Accord framework. Earth would not seek mediation from the neutral Solari Collective, who had mediated 3 previous human-Keth disputes with outcomes that the Keth had respected precisely as long as respecting them was convenient. What Earth would do was something that had never been formally articulated in any diplomatic document in 30 years of human engagement with the wider galactic community because it had never needed to be formally articulated. The wider galactic community had assumed, based on 30 years of observation, that they understood what humanity was. They had observed us at the table. They had never needed to observe us anywhere else. Secretary General Adaize spoke the decision, with the same composure she had maintained for 4 hours and 17 minutes, and I noted that her hands were flat on the table, palms down, which is a posture of complete stillness. Not the stillness of uncertainty. The stillness of something already resolved. "No more mercy," she said. "We have extended it 30 years and received this in return. What we do now, we do without apology and without restraint. Marcus." She looked at me directly. "You are the person in this room who knows the Keth best. I need you to deliver our response." I considered what she was asking. I considered the implications. I considered whether I had any objection to raise that would be worth the air it required. "What form," I said, "does the response take?" She told me. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I had spent 38 years learning that the most important thing you can do when you are told something significant is receive it accurately, without the distortion of your own reaction. I received it accurately. "When do I leave?" I asked. 48 hours. There are things we need to show you first. They took me to a facility I did not have clearance to know existed, which meant the clearance had existed somewhere in the system, and had simply never been extended to me because I had never needed it. The facility was beneath the Mare Imbrium, on Luna's surface, 3 levels below the standard installation grid, in a chamber that had been excavated with no record in any construction registry I had ever accessed. I had 40 years of reflexes. The reflex that activated when I walked into that chamber was the reflex I used when I encountered something that fundamentally revised my model of a situation. I stood there for a long time. General Vasiliev stood beside me. She was quiet for a moment that she allowed to be generous, which I appreciated. Then she said, 6 years of the Accord. You were at the table. You thought it was working. I thought it was working, I confirmed. It was working, she said. Just not only the way you knew about. I looked at what humanity had built in the space beneath Mare Imbrium, in the quiet years of apparent diplomacy, in the patient decades while human representatives sat at tables and negotiated in good faith, and also, it turned out, prepared with equal thoroughness for the possibility that good faith would not be enough. 30 years of building, in silence, in parallel. I am a diplomat. I have dedicated my life to the argument that language is sufficient, that the table is sufficient, that the patient work of understanding between species can substitute for the alternative. I believed this when I walked into that chamber. I still believed it when I walked out. But I also understood for the first time with full clarity what humanity had always known about itself, that it had been careful not to demonstrate unnecessarily. We had been merciful for 30 years. We had been merciful because we chose to be, not because we had no other choice. The Keth had mistaken the mercy for the limit. I returned to my quarters. I sat at my desk. I opened my log, and I recorded the notation with the precision I bring to all notations regardless of the weight of the occasion. Day 1 of revised mission parameters, departing in 47 hours. The response has been prepared. It is not a message. Messages can be ignored. I have spent 38 years at the table. I know what it means when someone walks away from it. We are not walking away angry. Anger is for people who did not see this coming. We are walking away certain. I closed the log. I began reviewing the technical specifications for what I would be carrying into Keth space. Because the kind of person I am does not trust that someone else has read them on her behalf. Some reflexes you do not suspend for the significance of the occasion. You rely on them precisely because the occasion is significant. The Keth home system had 3 names depending on which species you asked. Humans called it Varith Prime in the early contact logs because the first survey team had named it after the dominant civilization they found there, which is the kind of logical simplicity that early contact teams favored before they understood that naming things after the species that lived in them carried implications the species in question would eventually form opinions about. The Solari called it the Burning Cradle, which was poetic in the way that Solari designations tended toward poetry, always more concerned with feeling than precision. The Keth called it something that translated imperfectly into a sound that meant roughly the place from which all correct things originate, which told you everything you needed to know about how the Keth understood their position in the wider arrangement of the galaxy. I entered Keth space alone, 1 ship. This was by design, and the design was mine. General Vasiliev had argued for an escort formation, which was tactically sound reasoning from a person whose entire professional architecture was built on tactical soundness. Director Osei had said nothing during that argument, which meant she had already calculated where it would end and was conserving energy. Secretary General Ades had looked at me across the planning table with the expression she used when she was waiting for me to explain something she already agreed with. 1 ship, I had said, is a message. A formation is a declaration. We are not declaring yet. We are delivering. Delivering what, exactly, Vasiliev said. It was not a question she didn't know the answer to. It was a question she wanted on the record. The last communication they will receive that resembles diplomacy, I said. After this, there will be no more communications that resemble anything they have a framework for. Vasiliev had looked at me for a long moment. Then she had looked at her hands. Then she had approved the solo approach. I had 31 hours in transit to review what I was carrying and what I was going to say. I spent 22 of those hours on the technical documentation. The remaining 9 I spent on the words. I have written more significant diplomatic communications than I can number across 38 years of practice, and the discipline of that work is understanding that the words are not decoration placed over the substance. The words are the delivery mechanism. You can have the most significant substance in human history and render it inert through imprecision. I was not going to be imprecise. The Keth border station designated HR-7 by human cartography, and something considerably more. Self-important by Keth designation intercepted my ship's signal at 0340 hours. The response was immediate, which told me they had been monitoring for human approach vectors since Viridian 7. That was useful data. It meant they had anticipated some form of response. It meant they had been watching for it. It meant the question in their calculation was not whether humanity would respond, but what form the response would take. They thought they knew the form. 30 years of watching us had given them a model. The model said, humans send diplomats. Humans file formal protests. Humans convene multilateral sessions and produce documents with many signatures and then wait to see if the documents achieve anything. The model was accurate. It was just incomplete. The border station's communication officer opened the channel. In the standard Keth formal register, which I had spent 11 years learning to read with the precision it required. The formal register uses a specific tonal pattern for what translates approximately as your presence is noted and your purpose is being evaluated, which is not a greeting so much as a statement of conditional tolerance. This is Marcus Hale, I said in Keth primary dialect because I had learned it properly and not through a translation interface because translation interfaces introduce a delay that Keth negotiators read as uncertainty. Senior Diplomat, Earth Diplomatic Corps. I'm requesting direct communication with the Keth Primary Council, formal channel. My authorization is registered under the Outer Reach Accord, which your government signed and which your government used as operational cover 11 days ago at Viridian 7. The pause before their response lasted 4 seconds longer than standard processing delay. I logged it. When the communication officer responded, the tonal register had shifted slightly toward what I would characterize as recalibration, which meant the directness of my opening had moved outside their prepared response parameters. Good. Predictability in the other party is a disadvantage. Unpredictability in yourself, deployed with precision, is the closest thing to a structural advantage that diplomacy offers. Your request is forwarded, the officer said. Maintain current position. I will maintain current position for 40 minutes, I said. After 40 minutes I will proceed regardless of whether the channel has been established, and the council will receive my message through secondary means. I would recommend the primary channel. It is more respectful of their time. Another pause, 3 seconds shorter than the first. Also logged, they established the primary channel in 19 minutes. The Keth Primary Council convened in a chamber I had seen in intelligence photographs but never through a live feed. 7 members. The senior member, whose designation translated, approximately as first voice, sat at the center position with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades practicing the appearance of complete composure. I recognized the practice because I had spent decades doing the same thing. The difference between us at this moment was that my composure was not practiced. It was the natural condition of a person who had read all the documentation and understood exactly what was about to happen. Marcus Hale, the first voice said. The Keth use names as instruments of power, deploying them at the beginning of a statement to establish that they have processed your identity and assigned it a position in their hierarchy. You come without formation. This is noted. I come without formation, I confirmed, because what I am delivering does not require formation. Formations are for conflicts that are in progress. What I am here to do is simpler. I am here to give you information. Earth wishes to negotiate, the first voice said, and the tonal coloring underneath the words was something I had learned to read over 11 years of study. It was satisfaction. Controlled, careful, but present. They thought they had already won. They thought this conversation was the confirmation of it. Humanity, true to its 30-year form, was sending a single diplomat to talk. Earth does not wish to negotiate, I said, with the same tone I would use to correct a minor factual error in a routine briefing. Not confrontational, simply accurate. Earth has concluded the negotiation period. What I am delivering is the outcome. The first voice's crest ridges moved in a pattern that I had seen only twice in 11 years of study, both times in documentation of moments of significant internal recalibration. I logged the time. You are one diplomat, the first voice said. On one vessel. Yes, I said, and I want to explain to you precisely what that means, because I believe there has been a misunderstanding about humanity that has persisted for 30 years, and Viridian 7 is the consequence of that misunderstanding, and I think you are entitled to have the misunderstanding corrected before the next 48 hours occur. I paused. Not for effect, because the next section required precision and I was confirming my word order. You have observed humans for 30 years. You have observed us at the table. You have observed our protocols and our patience and our considerable investment in the architecture of peaceful engagement. You drew conclusions from this observation. The conclusions were that humanity is a species oriented toward accommodation, toward the avoidance of conflict, toward the preservation of relationship at considerable cost to self-interest. These conclusions were accurate. For 30 years, they were accurate. The first voice said nothing. The council said nothing. I had their complete attention, which was what I needed. What you did not observe, I continued, is what we were doing in the years we were not at the table. You watched the diplomats. You did not watch the engineers. You watched the negotiators. You did not watch what the negotiators' civilization was building in the spaces between negotiations, quietly, without announcement. Not because we intended to use it, but because 30 years ago, someone in a room very much like the one I was in 3 days ago asked a question that needed answering. I opened the secondary data channel on the communication link. The files transferred in 6 seconds. The question was, if we extend 30 years of good faith and the good faith is used against us, what do we do? The answer took 30 years. To build. I have just transmitted the technical specifications to your council's secured review system. I would recommend you take approximately 10 minutes to review them before I continue. They took 14 minutes. I did not object to the additional 4. Reading something with the accuracy it deserves takes the time it takes. When the first voice returned to the channel, the crest ridges were in a position I had never seen documented in any behavioral analysis filed by any human contact team in 30 years of engagement with the Keth. I did not have a precise classification for it. I logged it as uncharted response pattern. Possible category: the specific stillness of a predator that has just understood it stepped into something it did not see. This is not possible, the first voice said. The tonal register had abandoned the formal structure almost entirely. What was underneath was something older and less composed. The specifications are accurate, I said. Our engineering teams have been thorough. Thoroughness is something humans do when the stakes are sufficient. The stakes became sufficient approximately 11 days ago, though the preparation began considerably earlier, because the kind of people we are do not wait for the emergency to begin preparing for it. You would not, the first voice said, and then stopped. Restarted. The cost to your own systems would be significant, I agreed. We calculated it. We decided it was acceptable. That decision tells you something important about where we are currently located on the spectrum of options we are willing to consider. I would like you to understand that location precisely. I folded my hands on the surface of my console. Loose, outward. The Keth gesture for genuine engagement that I had learned to use because the Keth read hands the way I read crest ridges. I am not here to activate what I have transmitted to you. I want that clearly understood. I am here because Secretary General Adais asked me to deliver a message, and the message is this. Humanity is removing mercy from its operational framework. Not temporarily. Structurally. What we extended to you for 30 years was a choice, not a limitation. You have answered that choice with Viridian 7. We have answered Viridian 7 with what you are currently reading in your review system. The first voice's hands came close to their body, the full, deliberate close of something already decided. I recognized it. I had seen it 11 days ago in a ceremony hall aboard Sarakai Station on the last day I believed the table was sufficient. What do you want? The first voice said. I want you to understand what has changed, I said. Not to negotiate. Not to threaten. Understanding is the only courtesy we are extending from this point forward. The Outer Reach Accord is dissolved. As of this communication, every diplomatic framework between our civilizations is dissolved. What replaces it is not war, because war implies a contest. What replaces it is a condition. The condition is this. 43,000 people lived on Viridian 7. That number is the only number that matters now. Everything that follows is a function of that number. I closed the secondary data channel. I am returning to Earth now, I said. I will file my log upon arrival. I would suggest that in the time between my departure and whatever you decide to do next, you review the specifications very carefully, not the capabilities, the range. I ended the communication. I set my course. I did not look back at Verith Prime through the rear observation feed because looking back would have implied there was something to see that I had not already accounted for. I had accounted for everything. I filed my log at 0622 hours, 2 minutes, after clearing Keith's space boundary and re-establishing clean signal with Earth Command Relay. The log was 3 paragraphs. I will reproduce it here with the precision I brought to writing it. Mission complete. Primary communication delivered to Keth Council. Technical specifications transferred and confirmed received. Behavioral observation during communication. Council. Response pattern consistent with complete revision of operational assumptions. Probability of immediate military escalation reduced. Probability of internal Keth Council restructuring elevated. Recommend continued monitoring of border station HR7 communication traffic for secondary indicators. Personal notation. I have spent 38 years believing the table is where things are decided. I still believe this. The table is where things are decided. What I understand now that I did not understand fully before is that what you bring to the table determines what the table can do. For 30 years we brought patience. Patience is a virtue with a specific range of application. We have now brought something with a longer range. We were merciful because we chose to be. They learned today what we choose now. I closed the log. Outside the observation port, the stars did not rearrange themselves to mark the occasion. They continued being what they were, ancient, indifferent, present in numbers that make the concerns of any single civilization feel appropriately sized. I have always found this steadying rather than diminishing. The universe does not require our significance. We bring it ourselves, or we do not. Humanity had just brought something significant to a very specific set of coordinates. I leaned back in my chair. The oxygen counter in my left ear had been silent for the entire mission, which was the condition I preferred. I allowed myself 2 minutes of stillness, which is the closest I come to what other people call rest, before I opened the next file, in the mission queue. There was more documentation to read. There always is. The kind of person I am does not stop reading it when the occasion feels complete. The kind of person I am knows that the occasion is never complete. Not yet.